Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Balancing Act, the podcast devoted to helping families navigate memory loss and dementia. I'm Kelly Burtonshaw. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I want to consider this question. What if the behavior that frustrates you the most is actually one of the clearest clues about how your loved one is experiencing the world? What I'm talking about are the dementia-related repetitive questions, routines, and actions that families tell me are among the most difficult parts of caregiving. It becomes exhausting because it can feel like there's never going to be a resolution. It's just this never-ending loop. Most of us are accustomed to communication moving forward. A question is asked and answered, the concern is resolved, and attention shifts elsewhere. Dementia interrupts that process. And the challenge for your loved one is not simply remembering information. The challenge is maintaining the certainty that information is supposed to create. So today, I want to look beyond the behaviors themselves and explore what repetition can tell us about a changing brain. Because once we understand why that repetition develops, we can stop viewing it as a problem that needs to be eliminated and start recognizing it as a communication that can guide our responses. In my experience, families often think that repetitive questioning, pacing, and repetitive routines as separate symptoms. And the problem is, once we label something as a symptom, we often stop being curious. We stop asking, why is this happening? What is it telling us about the person and how they're experiencing the world? In reality, these behaviors are connected by the same underlying challenge: the brain's growing dependence on familiarity as other cognitive abilities become less reliable. As the brain becomes less efficient at processing new information and adapting to change, familiar pathways become increasingly valuable and, in many cases, necessary. There is a clinical name for this specific cognitive condition: Perseveration, and it basically involves the dementia-related tendency to repeat behaviors, responses, or even thoughts excessively. It is the figurative broken record. This also helps explain why repetitive routines often become more pronounced over time. Families frequently tell me how inflexible their loved one has become and how upset they become when even small changes are suggested. But what appears rigid from the outside can actually be the brain relying on patterns that remain dependable when all those other abilities have become less reliable. The routine itself is not the goal. The value often lies in the predictability it provides. It's also very important to understand that dementia affects far more than memory. When families hear the same question repeatedly, the natural assumption is that the answer has been forgotten. Now, sometimes that's true, but repetitive questioning is often much more complicated than simple memory loss. A healthy brain is constantly gathering information, organizing it, interpreting it, and then deciding what to do with it. Most of this happens automatically, which is why we rarely think about it. As dementia progresses, those processes become much less efficient. Information becomes harder to retain, conclusions become harder to trust, and adapting to new situations requires a lot more effort. And the result is a gradual loss of certainty about what's happening, what's going to come next, and whether a concern has actually been resolved. The question returns because the certainty doesn't. I remember a wife telling me that the hardest part of her husband's dementia wasn't the diagnosis, all the appointments, and the increasing need for help. It was hearing the same question dozens of times a day. Every time he asked it, she answered patiently. Then she answered it again and again, and eventually she found herself saying, "You just asked me that." What struck her was that he looked genuinely surprised every time she said it. She wasn't trying to be difficult. He wasn't testing her patience. In his mind, the concern felt just as real and unresolved as it had the other times he had asked. Once she stopped viewing the question as something he should remember and started viewing it as evidence that the concern still felt unsettled to him, her responses changed. She became a lot less focused on reminding him that she had already asked and more focused on recognizing that, for him, the question still needed an answer. Of course, the repetition didn't stop, but the frustration surrounding it became so much easier for her to manage. Before we continue, if you're finding these conversations helpful, I'd like to ask a small favor. Please take a moment to follow or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. You can also join the conversation at our Facebook page, where I share tons of resources, updates, and ways to support families navigating memory loss. And if you'd like to help keep this podcast going, you can support the show through my Buy Me a Coffee link in today's show notes. Most importantly, thank you for spending this time with me and for being a part of this community. Now let's get back to today's episode. Now that we've talked about what's behind repetitive questioning, it becomes easier to understand other repetitive behaviors as well. Pacing is another behavior that is frequently misunderstood. Caregivers often focus on the fact that the person is not getting anywhere. They walk from room to room, they retrace the same path, and they repeat this throughout the day. Viewed from that perspective, the behavior can seem purposeless. But pacing may be accomplishing something very important. As their environment becomes harder to interpret and an internal certainty becomes harder to maintain, movement can provide a continuous experience that feels predictable and manageable. Walking requires far less cognitive effort than trying to make sense of what's going on around them. The goal is not the destination. The goal is the movement itself. Now, this doesn't mean every instance of pacing should not be investigated. Physical discomfort, fatigue, the effects of some medications, and environmental stressors should always be considered. But pacing reminds us that repetitive behaviors often serve a purpose, even when that purpose is not immediately obvious. Another challenge caregivers face is that repetition can feel like communication failure. Everyone ends up frustrated, and that frustration is completely understandable. But it often comes from applying the rules of normal communication to a brain that can no longer operate under those rules. Dementia gradually chips away at the processes that allow information to be retained, organized, and carried forward. The conversation isn't failing. The brain just can't keep track. Now, as caregivers, our instinct is often to ask, how can we stop these behaviors? While that reaction is completely understandable, it may not always be the most useful starting point. Perhaps a better question is, what patterns seem to make this behavior more or less likely to occur? Because repetition rarely happens in isolation. Some physical needs to consider are fatigue, hunger, even pain, or maybe they're just plain uncomfortable. Just for a moment, let's put ourselves in your loved one's shoes. If things around you aren't making sense, if you're confused, you don't know what's happening, and you're not getting the answers that you need, think about the anxiety and the fear that would cause anyone. Repetitive behaviors can be a window not only to your loved one's needs, but their well-being. As we close today, I want to return to the question we started with. What if the behavior that frustrates you the most is actually one of the clearest clues about how your loved one is experiencing the world? Repetitive behaviors tell us something about what the brain is trying to accomplish. Rather than signaling that your loved one has stopped adapting, these behaviors reveal how adaptation is taking place. I've included some excellent resources today in the show notes about repetitive behaviors and practical ways to respond that can lower stress and frustration for both caregivers and loved ones. And if you have any questions or comments, please reach out through our Facebook page. You'll find the link in today's show notes. After all, I'm here to help. And as you answer the same question for the 10th time today, give yourself some grace. No one is perfect at this. No one. You're doing the best you can. You're doing it from a place of love. And that is enough. I'm Kelly Burtonshaw, and it was my pleasure spending time with you today. Please keep in touch.
Hi, I'm Peggy Wright, editor and producer of this podcast. We know that juggling your loved one's care while trying to manage your own life can truly become a balancing act. We want to help you as you navigate this journey by offering our support. You can reach out to us anytime by going to our Facebook page to ask questions, leave comments for Kelly, or talk with her one-on-one by setting up a chat. The link is in the show notes. And you can find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please take a moment to rate and review so we can continue to provide relevant content. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for listening today.